Have you got the wrong idea about personal knowledge management? Let's find out. I'm Lucas, here with my brother Jack, and we are diving deep into the world of knowledge management systems. This is our seventh episode in the series, so you may want to go back and get caught up if you aren't already. Now that we've understood what knowledge management is all about, we want to start applying these principles in the real world. As always, being wrong is about embracing subjective experience over objective truth. We're not interested in being correct. We just want to explore our own insights and opinions. So, Jack, what does this make you think about?
Well, I know last week we had talked about taking action on our notes, and that's incredibly important to think about with this episode in mind because using these systems in the real world is a little bit different than taking action on them. We spoke a little last week about how to keep them up to date and usable and not becoming sort of stale. We want to keep them dynamic. But now we're really thinking about how they can sort of help us work in the world, how they can make us more productive, how we can use them to achieve our goals, and how we can really integrate them into our daily lives.
I posed a challenge to you, which was about kind of redoing our own knowledge management systems with everything we've learned in mind. And while I think that we've talked a lot about interesting ideas and principles here, I really want is I want us to put them to use, and I want us to learn from what we've uncovered, what we've researched, and see if we can actually better our own systems. And once we've done that, we can come back and reflect on how we changed things, what did or didn't work, and how much the research we did helped us build the right tools for our needs.
This was fun. I really enjoyed when you brought this to me because it's like, okay, now we really get to use what we've put out to you guys, the viewers, and see how it works for ourselves. We sort of get to reflect upon our own work and see how effective is it is for us. And I think that once we sort of come back and have our little, sort of, should we say, gathering get together about how wrong we were the whole time and how wrong we're going to be again in the future, it's going to be interesting to see how we've been able to integrate what we've learned into our own lives and our own systems.
It's certainly easy to try something new when you know you're already going to get it wrong. Let's start with a quick question about, I guess, what we think these systems can really do for us. How are we going to change what we're already using to make things even better?
Well, we certainly want to know that these things are here to help us organize our lives a little bit. Our lives are very chaotic and disorganized as it is. You've got, appointments, you've got jobs, you've got friends, you've got family, you've got your own personal life. There's so many things that you have to balance. And the goal of this is really to sort of help you organize all of those things so that your brain isn't trying to be so your brain doesn't have to do the organization. We would like the computers to do the organization for us because frankly our brains are not so incredible at storing mountains and mountains of information, believe it or not. Computers are actually pretty good at that because they have hard drives and computer don't forget. Human brain do forget. But what computers can do is a lot of the like sort of logical reasoning stuff, AI is pretty good at doing some of the tasks like that, but really human beings have, and no other way for me to put it, the human touch still.
So you make a good point about chaotic lives. You're done with school now for the summer, but you've got all kinds of other projects that you're working on or just reading that you want to do, whatever it is. Even maybe like you have ideas of what you want to prepare to not forget for next year school. Like there's all kinds of stuff that you need to be doing. I'm starting a new job, so I need to organize things for my work life, and I need to balance that with the personal projects I've been working on as well as my own reading and research. So, yeah, I think that for us we should both spend some time defining our goals, and I think we'll come to that first. But I guess the part that I want to start with has more to do with just everything that is coming at us all at once, the information overload. How do we make sure that we're actually capturing the stuff that matters? Because that's the first part in our core model, right? Capture, organize, retrieve, and enhance. So if we have all of this information available to us, where do we focus our efforts? How do we start that capture process?
Well, I think the first step is really gonna be just sort of getting everything down that you can. Don't try and filter things out on that first pass through. Get as much as you humanly can, and then start to wane through it and see what you think is important and necessary. Of course, you don't need to write down verbatim everything that's happening, but you would like to get as many of the big ideas down as you can. Phrases that sound like they might be important. Maybe there's pictures if you can, sort of maybe writing a blurb about what a picture is, depending if you're taking in a video, if you're watching a lecture, stuff like that. But once you sort of have all of that information there at the start, you want to make sure that you're getting all of the quality information out of it. So there will be fluff that you're able to cut out quite easily, but there's also going to be synthesis which can be done, insights which can be extracted. That's incredibly important. But I think that the first important piece is that sort of first pass through, getting down everything that you can and knowing that in most scenarios for the information that you're intaking, be it reading, videos, a recorded lecture, anything that's not happening live in front of you, you can go back and look at again. So just get as much of the information as you can through the first time and then take a second pass through and start to, you know, weed through what might be the bullshit and what's the actually good insights and information that you can get out of it.
Yeah, you'd think that the advice would be capture you want quality over quantity. I feel like that's almost always like the phrase you hear, but I actually think to your point, the idea of ubiquitous capture, something we've talked about previously, is actually super important here. And as we've learned in our research, we want the AI to be able to help us sort of organize this information or even weed out and filter some of this stuff. So I think that you're right. We should err actually on the side of quantity over quality. We want to get everything in, and then we can filter out the relevant pieces as we go. And then even if we can't necessarily use all these AI tools and have them like neatly integrated into our systems, I think that I'm still going to err on this side, and I would rather kind of set myself up in a way where I can very quickly grab everything that I've captured for the last day or week or whatever and throw it into a language model to summarize and pull out the most important things, something like that. I guess my point is, I like starting with this notion of ubiquitous capture. I think that is absolutely important. But I also want to highlight this notion of tagging because the biggest change I think I'm going to make in my system has to do with having a very flat structure, not a lot of hierarchical files, and trying to rely heavily on tags so that I can create relationships between the notes rather than trying to force my own artificial organization system on top of it.
So I think that what I really like about this idea is that it creates relationships between your information, because a lot of the information that you have will have some overlaps. I mean specifically between maybe your work life, your personal life, your life with your family, whatever. There will be overlaps in your information, but since you're keeping them quartered off from each other to not blend together your work life, personal life, for example, you usually won't see those sorts of overlaps. They're going to sort of be disconnected in your head. But if you're able to use tags, then you regain back that ability to sort of see everything that might have been missing. And being able to link your knowledge together creates this almost sort of like, the only way I'm thinking of it is like it looks like a spider web. Your knowledge is incredibly interconnected and related, and it'll help you extract really, really, really important insights. So I think that if you're able to sort of integrate this at least partially into your system, it will be helpful because after all, our knowledge is connected, all of it, because of our interests and the types of people that we are. We're going to be thinking about similar things in similar ways, regardless of how different they may be. So, starting to notice some of these connections will also sort to help you notice trends about how you are as a learner and a thinker. So, I think it's actually really a powerful tactic.
What sticks out to me here is actually this notion that I am typically the type of person who likes to understand the structure of the information and how it's all organized. I feel like I think a lot about that. My current Notion setup actually has, I would say, decently well organized sections. But the biggest issue I've found is that like I'm constantly trying to find the right place for information. So I think the biggest thing for me is going to be getting myself more comfortable with the idea of like the right place will emerge as you enrich the data with more information. But I also liked what you were talking about in terms of, because we're both going to be dealing with this in different ways, but we have similar sort of approaches to what we want to accomplish. We're after the same thing. We should be during this process collaborating as much as possible and like talking about what's working for you versus what's working for me, and if there's things we can learn from each other. Because I think, again, a big part of this stuff with any knowledge management system, while it's a personal knowledge management system, that doesn't mean that it doesn't help to share that with others.
This is very true. And I think that it's really one of the best things that you could do is having someone to build a knowledge system in tangent in tandem with, not tangent with. Good God, math is already slipping back into my brain. I don't want this. I was ready for this to not be part of my head for a little while, but regardless, back on the topic. Having somebody to sort of do this with you at the same time is a really good sort of tool because it gives you almost not like a test dummy. You don't want to call the person you're doing this with a test dummy because you and me certainly are far from that, but because you and me are similar-ish thinkers, we are related after all, but different in the way that we do abstraction. There are certainly things which will work for me and work for you that may not work for the other person, and there will certainly be pitfalls and errors that we come across and we want to alert the other person to avoid. And it's basically just, as simple as if there's two people trying to attack the same problem from two different perspectives, you're both gonna end up helping the other person get to where they want to get to a whole lot faster because the insights, like we said, we're after insights here, but the insights about how these systems work are going to be fairly ubiquitous. The pitfalls will be fairly ubiquitous, and even tools and things that we want to use and help integrate, or maybe that we can help slightly modify person to person, really just to sort of accelerates the whole process.
You've touched on something here around things like common pitfalls that we might want to avoid. And I feel like this starts with setting objectives. Like, what are our goals? What are we actually trying to accomplish with these systems? And if we know what that is, there are definitely some things that we already know from our own work and just from common wisdom that help us understand, you know, things we should be cognizant of, things that we should avoid doing that have been proven to fail, right?
I think that setting clear objectives is that first step because without knowing what you want to do, then you're sort of just designing a system based upon somebody else's recommendations and it's not going to be personalized. And that's what I want to touch on here is because you want the system to be very personal to your needs, your desires, your habits, your personal weaknesses and strengths at the same time. This system should be tailor fit and tailor made to your liking. There is nothing less that you would want than a system built for somebody else that you're trying to fit into. This system should be built to fit around you. So, setting those clear objectives and making sure that it's personalized to you, I think probably might be the two most important things that you could do before you start setting yourself out on this journey.
I think that because it's so dynamic, we also need to be ready for our goals to change and adapt as we go. So we want them to be personalized, but we also want to be aware of how our needs are changing as we make progress. So while it's important to set clear objectives, I think we've emphasized this point across a number of different episodes, but having that sense of direction is really the most important part. It's this imagining where you want to be, and then the creativity will help you get from where you are to where you want to be. And as long as we have some place in mind that we want to go, we can always adjust course as that image changes. Setting goals is just as important as updating those goals as context and your needs change.
That's incredibly well put. I think that's almost perfect. I don't know if there's anything I really can add to that. Your goals, your system should be dynamic because your goals well, literally, like I just said, your goals should be dynamic because your endpoint, your like sort of mission is going to be dynamic. What you need to get done is going to change. And like you said, as that picture of what you want sort of becomes clearer, you can change course, shift things around as need be to sort of make sure that it's always working its best for you. Because I think that you don't want to spend too much time over optimizing. If you spend too much time trying to like make it all perfect from the jump, then you're going to have some problems. I think realistically a good philosophy to follow for this is sort of like, as long as it works and it is not becoming a significant roadblock, there is no need for me to yet fix it. If it starts to become a big problem, like a recurring problem, and it's either hampering you from properly organizing, properly putting it in, properly retrieving your knowledge, or properly enhancing your knowledge, then your system is probably just fine. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to become something which you can integrate into your daily life.
I think all of that is fair. And I just want to, I guess, push forward into this notion of reviewing your system regularly. Like, I guess if we're going into this notion of pitfalls, places that we want to avoid common problems, if you're not reviewing what you're doing and updating it, you're missing one of the essential parts of this whole process. And I think that we've also talked about how important it is for this to be sustainable as a process. Personal knowledge management isn't something you do for a little while, it should be something that you're maintaining regularly. So it needs to be engaging enough to keep you going. And I'm reminded of the work that we were doing in earlier episodes when we were thinking about sort of the principles of knowledge management. And the one that still sticks out to me above all is simplicity. I think we really want to make these systems as easy to use as possible so that we do keep using them. The more complicated you make your system, the more areas or the more opportunities for it to fail, as I guess the way I would think about it.
I mean, I literally have started telling people, give it the kiss of simplicity. And kiss is literally just keep it simple, stupid. Like, there is no need to overcomplicate anything that you're doing for any reason. Like you said, it just gives it more room to fail. If you can simplify down anything that you're doing, simplify it. It will make your life easier. It will make it more easy for you to be consistent. It won't feel like such a haggle or a hassle. And then it really starts to just serve you better and better and better. If you need to add levels of complexity for it to work, go ahead. But I think there's a difference between sort of it evolving and it becoming complicated and it becoming better functioning and better serving. There are levels of complexity which will happen as your system evolves, but what you don't want to have happen is extra levels of complexity for no good reason. You don't want to like all of a sudden start embedding, like, say you're using Notion calendars and databases for like no good reason when you've never used them before and you saw something on YouTube. Like, that's not what you want to do. If it literally works for you to just have like 4 pages where you divide things up and you've got subcategories with all your pages there, tremendous. Great. If it works for you, if it's easy for you to find everything, if it's easy to organize, more power to you. If it's that simple and it works for you and it's consistent throughout and you're not finding any sort of major, redundancy or conflicts through information, then there you go. You found your personal knowledge management system that works for you.
Well, you've got me thinking about how we weave this into our daily routines. And I like what you're talking about in terms of do what's working for you. And I agree with that. But I also think that we need to pair that with the regular review and updating. And I think the point that you're hitting on that sticks out to me is again this principle of knowledge management that is consistency. If you can find a way to consistently keep your information organized in a way that works for you, that's perfect. But if you find that it's not doing that, or that you're being inconsistent in your ability to access information, or you're being inconsistent in where you put different things, if you can start to identify what those inconsistencies are, you like that's a good hint at where your system needs review. So I guess that principle sticks out most strongly in the case of again routine, because if you think consistency and routine, like this is how you start to transition into making this a habit.
This is an incredibly important principle to highlight here. And I think that, again, this very much so echoes the point that I was trying to make and highlights a good point. If it's working, great. But that doesn't mean that you should become content or complacent with how it is working. you should always be checking in with it. Maybe even having somebody else coming over and looking at it and maybe asking you a question. How does this work for you? Could you do this better? Hey, I tried this because I saw that this was working a little bit slowly for me. I see some sort of similarities here, stuff like that. Constantly reviewing it, trying to update it. There's no need to necessarily update it. I love the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But if you start to notice that it is breaking or it is wavering, if the diving board is starting to become a little bit too flimsy, then there's a good time for you to go and try and find a little bit of a solution. But you don't want to try and look for flaws in it necessarily, because I think what that'll do is just start to make you start overcomplicating things. You can try and look for maybe glaring flaws or glaring issues. It's taking you too long to find things. It's taking you too long just to put things in there. If those are pretty easy problems to suss out, because they're barriers to entry, or I guess exit if you're trying to retrieve it. But I guess entry to get into it. But you get my point here. If there are glaring obvious issues, go after them, attack them. But don't try and spend too much time over analyzing the system, because what you're going to end up realizing is that through use and just more scenarios, your system will start to take a better shape. It will start to form more to what you want the more you need it. Spending time using it is better than spending time trying to improve it and not using it and see what improvements will yield from that.
It's funny. I actually was thinking about computer systems the whole time you were talking about this, because it's so similar. What I find is that people will tend to, when they're learning software, they want to optimize lots of little things. Anywhere that they see that you could make an optimization, they want to fix it. And what you start to learn as you get more advanced and more senior in the software field is that oftentimes, like, you don't want to do what they call premature optimization. You want to build the system out to the point where it makes sense. You see how it works, all the pieces fit together. And then you want to start looking for bottlenecks. Where are things backing up? Where does it actually make sense to spend my time improving the efficiency of the system? And so it's a lot of the same principles you're talking about here, where you just want to be looking for places where, even if you just have an inkling that when you're doing something, one area feels like it's slower than it could be, or you wish that you could improve this one aspect, like, these are good places to start looking for where to improve your system. But I also want to remind you, because we did have this list of like 7 principles that were the foundations of knowledge management, and I like have gone back to find them, because I found myself continuing to think in these terms. And if we're trying to build our own systems, I think it's good to remind ourselves of what these principles are. And just quickly to run through them, and for the benefit of the listener: keep it simple, make it accessible, be adaptable, scale efficiently, stay consistent, maintain context, and ensure durability. So the the biggest ones we've highlighted are simplicity, adaptability, and consistency. And I think that as long as we keep the rest of these in mind, we'll be in a good place for building out these systems or improving our systems to adhere to these principles.
I absolutely agree. I think that was a good idea to go back and review that. Is there anything else that you would like to touch on before I take us home here?
No, I guess the last thing to say is that I'm going to be particularly focused on the logical boundaries of my system, by which I mean separation of concerns, the different areas of your life. So, like, as I'm starting a new job, I want to make sure that I'm managing my knowledge for those 2 areas separately, or at least in a way that, I know where to look for work related items, and I know where to look for project items and things like that. I think it's important to maintain that you identify the aspects of your life that you want to keep separate. Like, finding those logical boundaries is difficult, so I just think that it's worth putting some effort and thought into that. But otherwise, I think that's all I want to say. You can take us home.
All right, sweet. I will make my last comment and then take us home. I think that's great. I think it's a really good idea. Keep things separate. Things bleeding together is never a good idea. As a matter of fact, I would call that a wrong idea. And if you want to find more wrong idea content just like this, you can find us at The Wrong Idea on Instagram, TikTok, and X. And until next week, keep being wrong.
Got a thought that challenges the norm? We want to hear it. Post your wrong idea with the hashtag wrong idea. That's RONG idea. And join the conversation. Who knows? Your perspective might just be featured in a future episode. Remember, in a world of endless perspectives, all ideas are wrong ideas. Until next time, keep thinking, keep challenging, and keep embracing the unconventional.